Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. It is episode number 44. We are barreling towards number 50, guys. It is so good to be back with you all. And I'm excited because, today we have a pretty fun episode. As of the recording of this podcast, I usually do some editing and do some prep work. So sometimes big news breaks while I'm preparing the podcast, but hopefully... I guess not hopefully. I mean, who knows? Maybe something interesting will come up and we'll be sure to record an extra segment here. But as of the recording of this podcast, not a whole lot of news that came out over this past week, which is totally fine because that gave me an opportunity, I think, to include a couple of segments here that I normally wouldn't have time for, as we've been, we're talking about Agatha or Penguin or Rings of Power or Joker. So it's been busy over the last couple weeks as I try to have 6 or so segments to prepare for you guys. But today I just thought, just because there isn't much news doesn't mean we don't have a chance to talk about some, interesting things that I've always wanted to talk about explicitly on the channel. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope you guys are as well. But of course, we will be talking about Agatha, Penguin, and some other things that have been coming out over the past few days in the news. So, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, if you are listening on YouTube, thank you so much. Make sure to give the video a like. If you're on YouTube, if you could subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, it would mean so much to me. Thank you all so much for the support that you guys have been showing over the last couple months as we've been really ramping up the podcast again. I have just been so enjoying doing this, and it's been super gratifying. I know it's been a little bit of a change, stepping away from edited videos and really relaunching into the podcast format, but I hope you guys have been enjoying. And I've been really, really gratified to interact with a lot of new people on the channel and really awesome to be able to grow the community in that way. So thank you guys so much. If you're listening on Spotify, and yes, we do have a Spotify platform, the Access Blockbusters Pod is on Spotify and hopefully looking in the near future to come out on Apple Podcasts as well. Make sure to subscribe over there as well and leave a rating and let me know what you think about the podcast there. All right, guys, that is it for the housekeeping. Wanted to keep it short today. Let's actually get into the topics for today. So I wanted to start off the podcast with a little bit of a different topic. If you are listening if you're listening to the whole podcast, you might be able to see what the topic is about just based on the time codes in the description. And if you are listening to the segment, you obviously know what this is about because of the title of the clip. But I wanted to talk about what I believe makes a really great television show. And I want to preface this before anyone comments, and I'm sure I will get this comment nonetheless because people will probably comment just even before I have said a word. This is my own opinion, and this is not just my opinion because it's not like I'm watching a TV show and telling you I like the character, I like the writing, I didn't like this subplot. It's not so much of that, but more just what I believe speaks to me, I think is a better way of putting it, in terms of television shows. And I would love to be able to do a segment like this about movies and compare the two, because I think that there is a distinct difference here between the way that I view television shows and between the way I view movies, and what makes one speak louder than the other and what makes one better than the other. I think different things go into making these two mediums work better than others. So I'd like to do a segment about movies in the future, and let me know if you'd like to see this in a future podcast episode. Maybe I'll do it in the next one, who knows. But anyways, today we're talking about television shows, and I wanted to again preface that this is just what I believe speaks to me, and if you have other things that you look for in television, that's awesome, and I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But the title of this segment, what makes a good TV show, it's really just to start to stimulate conversation, but this is just for me personally. And I've made videos like this in the past. There's a video that is up on the channel from a long while ago called "You're Watching Movies Wrong," and I really do stand by that video. I think I haven't actually listened to it in a long time, but when I recorded it, when I edited it, and when I was thinking about it, I really stood by the fact that I think we, as people who watch films more critically, oftentimes rob ourselves of joy that we could be getting in these movies with the amount of cynicism and negativity that I've been seeing in fandoms lately. So anyways, that video's on the channel. This is going to be a kind of similar discussion here. So television shows. And, the definition of a television show, in fairness, has changed right? Because it used to be that when you had a television show, you had sort of a longer form serialized sitcom format where you would have maybe 20 to 25 episodes of a certain season at a given time, and each episode would be literally exactly 22 minutes long to account for credits to fill a 30-minute block, or it would be about 44 minutes to fill an hour-long block. That's just how it is. You have the sitcoms like Seinfeld and Friends and Cheers and everything like that. The Office, even Parks and Rec, 22-minute episodes, about 20 to 25 per season. Things have changed, right? We've now, I think, delved more into the mini-series format where we have, I would say, 6 on the low side. I'm looking at you, Disney Plus, even 5 for Echo. So, 5 to 6 episodes. Maybe I'd stretch it up to, let's say, 12. I have 12 or 13. There's no science to this, right? But I'm just, just throwing out numbers here. That, I think more and more these days, people have been gravitating towards different criteria for what they want their TV shows to be. And that's totally fine. And so I want to preface all this discussion by saying I think that there are nuances to what I'm about to say, and they apply to different parts of different aspects of different formats of TV shows, right? But I want to make some general statements about what speaks to me for TV shows. And then, I think that it can always be different. There are always exceptions that prove the rule. So when I think about a TV show, though, in general, right? Because yes, you have your Marvel TV shows that are maybe 3 hours worth of content, maybe even like 2.5. They're basically movie length, right? So I'm not counting those. I'm counting even miniseries where you have a show like The Penguin, which is 8 episodes, I believe, and each one's an hour long. So that's 8 hours of television. And even a show like Friends, let's do some math here. You have let's just say 20 episodes, right? And if you spend 30 minutes of time per episode, about 30 minutes, I know it's like 22, but let's just say 30 minutes, that's about 10 hours of television right there. So you spend a lot of time in these shows, right? And I think that that's the big distinguisher for me, is that there is an objective, for the most part, more a larger time commitment with a television show. That's number one. And I think leading from that, right, because television has a longer format, it is also the fact that you have to invest in it. You have to commit to it, right? Because, I think what's interesting about TV, you can say this about movies at home, if you're watching movies at home, but I think I'm thinking more of the theatrical format. The theatrical format, right? You pay $10, $15, $20 even for certain theaters. You pay a certain amount of money. You usually go and buy food, and you don't know, generally, if you're going to like the movie or not. And, I think if you go into a movie like, let's just say, Avengers Infinity War, if you're a Marvel fan, or The Batman, if you're a DC fan, or even just a fan of movies, I enjoy both, right? You're pretty much assured, for the most part, that you'll like the film. But there are always movies that you go in and people say it's the greatest movie, and you don't end up liking it. So there's no guarantee. But what is guaranteed is that you made an investment of your time and your money. And because of that, I think there is an incentive in a movie theater to sit there and wait it out depending on how you feel about the movie. It's an investment in a different way. But the other thing about that too is that, yes, it's an investment, but you're only there for 2 hours, give or take, maybe 3. You can always walk out of a movie for sure if you just don't like it in the first 30 minutes. But like I said, it's a kind of investment of money and time. And sure, you can get rid of the time aspect. You can walk out in the first 5 minutes, but you have spent money there. You've probably driven there, taken public transit to get there. And, it's an investment in that way. It's a little bit of a different kind of investment. And so I think most people would say when you go into a theater, you watch a movie, you're there, right? You're there for the long haul. You're there to stick it out. And stick it out means something like 2 hours. With television shows, there is an alarming, almost lack of commitment that, and I say alarming, I think in comparison, more to say that this is in comparison to movies, there is a really stark, I think that's a better word, stark contrast here in terms of the levels of commitment you have for TV shows. How many of us, I've done this so many times, how many of us have seen 1, maybe 2 episodes of a television show, even if the episodes are like 30 minutes long, and we've gone, I'm out. And that's totally fine, right? You've taken the time to check out a TV show, somebody recommended to you, or Netflix or Disney Plus or Apple have recommended to you, and you say, I'm good. No, thank you. I'm good. That's totally fine. But, right, it is not your obligation to stay and watch the TV show. Now, I mean, there's an argument to be made that there is a monetary investment to be made as well. Obviously, you're paying, let's just say, $16 a month for Disney Plus or whatever it is these days. I don't even know. And sure, I mean, yes, you are technically paying to to have the services and to watch the show. But the thing is, right, you can watch maybe 15 minutes of Agatha all along. And let's say you watch the first 15 minutes and you're like, I hate this, I'm out. Great. You're still paying $16 a month. So why don't you go and find another show, right? And that's a totally reasonable thing to do. And you stumble upon WandaVision, made by the same person, but you've heard good things. And you watch WandaVision and you're on your way. You love it, right? I think that there's a difference there. It's not like in a theater, you can watch the first 10 minutes and go, I don't like this. And you walk out and go from theater 10 to theater 9 and you go from, I don't know, Joker, Folie, and Deux to, let's say, Venom the Last Dance or something like that. Let's say Venom the Last Dance is the best movie ever made. You can't just do that, right? That's not what the theatrical experience is like. And so there's that. So really, one of the things here is that TV, the goal of TV is to get you hooked on the show. We've heard that term, right? I'm hooked on this TV show. I'm binging it. I'm hooked. Right, because it is actually the onus of the television, the onus of really, just enjoying the show is on the television show. It's really less on you. You can bail, especially in this world of streaming, anytime you want. Halfway through the season of Friends, you can bail if you don't like it. And so it is really on the television show and the writers and the directors and whatnot to make you stay, right? And so I think that that's a key difference there, where if there are things in a 2-hour movie and I'm sitting in a theater and I go, I don't love that. I don't really love that. I think that's not working. But if I'm not, I'm not at the point where I have to get up and leave. And I don't think I've ever left a movie theater. I could be wrong, in the middle of a movie because I didn't like it. I just don't think I've ever done that. Then I think that's what's at stake here, is that you're there to watch the movie. You can stick it out for 2 hours because maybe something happens at the end. You've paid your money and here you go. Right? So to me, that's one of the really key differences between a TV show and a movie. Now, for me, what this translates to is one thing in particular. I think the most important thing so given all of that information that I just said, for me personally, right? Although a lot of that is objective, but I think then this now informs what I'm about to say for me personally. I think there is one then key distinct difference between a TV show and a movie that TV shows have to get right. And that is the characters. Because look, I'm going to say this, and perhaps this is a little bit controversial. I don't think movies in general need to get their characters right in order for you to be invested in the movie, because the time frame is much shorter. It's 2 hours long. Let's just say you're watching a murder mystery and it's, I don't know, let's say it's a 2-hour movie and it's a murder mystery, and sure, does it help, like in Knives Out, that all the characters are really fun and Ana de Armas and Chris Evans and all the other characters are really fun? Sure, of course it helps. But let's just say they're the most bland, generic characters ever, but the plot, the story is riveting. The murder is riveting. And, the story is riveting, for sure. I mean, that's something that I can get behind, right? But for me, for television shows, because it's such an investment, I need to know, am I going to enjoy spending time in this world? Because it is an investment in time. Now, sure, there are always exceptions, right? And especially in this day and age of miniseries and whatnot, there are always exceptions, right? Because I can justify, okay, it's like 6 episodes and each episode's an hour. I can justify that maybe the characters aren't so great, but I'm enjoying the story. It's happened before, for sure. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but it's happened before. So that's totally fine. And on the flip side, there are also procedurals, right? Where I personally don't love these for this exact reason, but they work for many people, where you don't really care about the characters. In fact, the cast rotates every single time, and they're just solving a murder mystery every single week or whatever. Personally, those aren't the TV shows that I gravitate towards because of this exact reason. I am making a commitment to watch the show because, let's be honest, for those murder mystery procedurals, if an episode isn't good, right? If an episode doesn't land, I'm out, because I don't have any obligation to stay. And so, yeah, I can, like, if I watch the first 10 minutes of, let's just say, a crime mystery thriller with different characters every single episode, and I enjoy it, then I'm like, I'll watch the next one. The second the next episode isn't good, I'm out. But here's the difference to me, right? With characters you really, really care about, it doesn't matter if the show starts to fall off for me, because I'm going to still stick around just to be around these characters that I love and enjoy. This is the secret, I think, to what makes sitcoms so spectacular and so unique, but also so simply brilliant, is that what makes a good sitcom is good characters that make you stay. It's not the stories. I mean, sure, there are individual episodes of my favorite sitcoms like Friends or like The Office or whatever that I enjoy very much because of the episode. But what keeps me watching Friends, even through through season 7, 8, 9, 10, which definitely go downhill from the peak of seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5, is the characters. I want to just spend time with the characters. And even though I can acknowledge that the later seasons are just kind of bizarre and, maybe not as great as they were before, I want to spend time with the characters. Same for a show like The West Wing, right? Even though, I'm not going to actually spoil a bunch of things, even though I'm not even done with the show myself, but I'm well on my way. And, I know it's an older show, but, I just for the sake of it. But, even though things happen creatively behind the scenes that make the show maybe less interesting as it used to be, especially I think the peaks of season 1, 2, and 3 were just so high, doesn't mean that I'm going to just automatically stop watching the show, because I really care about the characters and their individual struggles. So to me, the key determining factor of what makes a really great television show, and I'll even take this example of Ted Lasso, right? Ted Lasso is a show that I love, even though I acknowledge season 3 is easily the weakest season of all the seasons of Ted Lasso. I stayed because I love the characters. I love Ted. I love watching Roy, Keeley, Rebecca, even Nate's redemption arc worked pretty well. I love the characters, and I love the way that these characters reflect different parts of society. So there are certainly story-driven television shows, right? The Penguin is an example. It's pretty story-driven, but the reason that I keep coming back as well, the reason that it goes over the top for me, is because the characterizations make me want to spend time with these characters. The Penguin, granted, it's a little bit different because I want to spend time with these characters because it's almost morbidly fascinating what they're doing and what they're going through. But even characters like Vic in The Penguin, I really care about him, right? And a movie, I think, can get away with just being like, well, just come along for the ride and maybe see if you enjoy the story and whatever. I've seen plenty of really generic movies with characters that had stories that were interesting enough. I'm going to be honest with you. Mission Impossible as a franchise, I don't come back to Mission Impossible because I love, watching Ethan Hunt go through his emotional turmoils and come out victorious. No, I don't really care. I watch Mission Impossible because I think the stories are usually pretty interesting and the action is obviously great. If you had to sustain that over 10 episodes for a season, I don't know. I mean, sure, it's really going to be really cool, and maybe that is one of the exceptions that that proves the rule. But I just don't know if I could sustain watching that, especially over many seasons and many episodes. So for me, the answer is really simple. I know that I could have said so many other things like story arcs and subplots and episode lengths and whatever. I really think, guys, at the end of the day, what distinguishes a good television show, especially in comparison to a good movie, is the characters. I actually think that, let's talk about some of the TV shows that have come out recently, right, and that are currently out. Rings of Power. I know a lot of you guys don't like Rings of Power. That's fine. I do, and I think that one of the things that made season 2 so much better than season 1 were that I was invested in the characters. Sauron was a fascinating character to me. Celebrimbor, even Durin and his father, Elrond, whatever Elrond was up to, and so many of the other characters, even Gandalf a little bit more, not that much. But season 1, oh my gosh, the characters were so bland, I couldn't care less. And that's really what made Rings of Power season 1 fall flat on its face for me. Agatha all along, a show that I find entertaining, but not the most enjoyable. Why is that? Because I don't feel super invested in the characters. I just don't, right? I don't really care about the emotional beats as much as I think the show wants me to. I just find it entertaining, is all. Let's talk about the Penguin. I just said, Colin Farrell's Penguin, Oz Cobb, is just a fascinating character to watch. And Vic is the anchor for me to dive into the show. So again, I just think that these are what keeps me coming back to watching good television. It doesn't matter now that it's not 22 episodes per season. Character to me is king in terms of what makes a good TV show. But I want to ask you guys, what do you think when you're watching a TV show? What distinguishes it from a movie? Is there anything? Do you look for the same things? And do you agree with what I'm saying? And if not, totally fine. I'd just love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below. What do you think makes a really good TV show? All right, so before we get into the reviews of the other properties that have been going on, I wanted to revisit a movie that came out last, I guess when this is coming out, maybe a couple weeks ago, but it is Joker Folie. I think about a week ago it came out. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, right? Because I think you've probably, if you're watching this clip and if you're listening to this podcast and if you're a regular member of the Access Blockbusters community, you've heard me talk, you've heard other people talk. This is not a beloved movie. Let's just put it kindly. It's not a film that has garnered much praise, is another way to put it. Joker Folie has had its moment in the spotlight, and I think that is more for worse than for better. But I wanted to revisit the film a little bit in light of some things that have come out, but also just to kind of, I have some more thoughts about it in light of, what has been coming out recently about just what happened behind the scenes. And then also just in light of what I think the movie was trying to do, because I also want to give the movie its due. And I want to explain just in further detail, because I recorded that review literally an hour after I saw the film, because I wanted to have my thoughts as fresh as possible to talk about it. So I want to articulate better, I think, what I have been thinking about when it comes to Joker Folie, listening to other people's reviews after I posted my own, and just thinking about it in the context of what this movie could have been. So there have been details that have come out that basically Todd Phillips was given free reign, there were no test screenings, and he could do whatever he wanted. Also, interestingly, this movie came out of a dream that Joaquin Phoenix had. I don't know, whatever, doesn't really matter to me. The part about this that I think is interesting is that Todd Phillips was given full control of this movie. Now, I don't want to dwell on that too much, because I think that that's interesting in and of itself, but it's also not that interesting to me on the other hand, because I think that, sure, there are plenty of movies that come out where the director has full control, and I think that Todd Phillips is perhaps not somebody who should have been given full control. I don't think he's at the level of Steven Spielberg, who can say to a studio, let me do my thing, and they will. They'll let him do his thing. And I just don't think Todd Phillips is at that level. And I think that that's fine. I just think that that was a mistake that was made on many fronts. But I think we ended up with this movie where Todd Phillips essentially just got to execute his vision for this movie. Full stop. That's it. Now, in terms of what I think Joker Folie was trying, or could have been, rather, because I don't want to speak for Todd Phillips. I don't know what he was really trying to say, but this is what I took from the film. I mentioned this a little bit in my spoiler review, in my non-spoiler and spoiler review, that I do believe genuinely that there is a brilliant movie in here somewhere. And I'm taking these from themes that I thought about, as the movie had ended. I'm thinking about this in terms of what I was gleaning from certain moments of the film. And here's what it came down to. There is a really good courtroom drama, psychological thriller that is inside this movie. And I want to say quickly that, by the way, if I'm not rejecting any criticism of this movie and saying that you're wrong for thinking a certain way. So what I'm about to say is more just me maybe gently pushing back and saying, I want to hear more about where this is coming from, because I disagree. There are people, and I've had friends who talk to me about this and say, this is a movie where nothing happened. And I think that's fine to say in the one sense of, sure, I mean, physically nothing happened. Maybe this is sacrilegious. I don't think that much happened in the first movie either. Honestly, that's not that, I didn't give this movie a great review. I didn't love the movie at all. But one of the problems I had with the movie was certainly not that nothing happened. I think that, there are movies that don't need a lot to physically be happening, right? I think the courtroom drama itself was fine enough to have a story. I think that there are other problems within that format that made the film a little bit confusing and like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. That, yeah, I agree with that for sure. But the argument that people are making to me this is a movie where nothing happened. I don't quite understand that. That's really not one of the problems I have, because I think that within this film, this is a film where you're trying to follow. I think what Todd Phillips was trying to do is really follow Arthur's psychological state, and then his grappling, I guess, if you will, of what was going on in his mind, and also his emotions, and eventually get to a place where, he understands his personas as Arthur and Joker, and what that did to society, etc., etc. Again, if done effectively, I don't think so, but I just don't love the argument that this is a film where nothing happened. I say that a lot with television shows, by the way, because sometimes there are 30-minute episodes, I'm looking at you, Mandalorian, where literally nothing happens to progress the story. But that's what I mean, like, progress the story. There's an overarching story that's going on, and nothing's being done to push that forward. Like, a lot happens in that frog egg episode, for sure, but to me, nothing happened to progress the story. This is a self-contained film, and it had a story, and I think that that's not really what the problem was with this film. But I think, right, those moments, I mentioned this in my review last week, there are moments here where I genuinely thought there was a good movie there. The courtroom stuff, especially towards the beginning of the courtroom stuff, and I think before the courtroom dance number, really interesting and psychologically interesting to me, to see how the world is trying to represent Arthur and Joker, and he has to stay silent. And then I think even the idea that he wants to speak for himself was interesting, right? Really interesting. And on top of that, the psychological manipulation of Harley, trying to manipulate Joker into coming out just for her own gain and her own fun, and her being a liar and her lying to try to get what she wants, I think is all super interesting. It all gets buried, though, under all of this other stuff that's going on in the film. But I think that is super interesting. And all that to say, within that context, like I mentioned last week, the themes of this movie, to me, do actually genuinely build on the themes of the first movie, where the first movie was trying to say, this is what happens in a society, in a world where we spit upon and we oppress people who are downtrodden and not given a fair shot in life. That's the point of the movie. Whether or not you agree with it, whether or not it resonates with you, different story altogether. I'm just trying to say, I think it's pretty obvious that's what the first movie was trying to say, amongst other things, because that's literally what Joker says at the end of that movie. I forget what the exact quote was, but it's like, what do you get when you get, somebody who's mentally ill in a society, whatever, you get what you deserve. He said that in a more graphic way, but obviously, that's his point. You get what you deserve, right? That was the point of the first movie. I think the second movie then was trying to expand upon it, and people have been reading into this and saying it's Todd Phillips biting back at people who love Joker. I don't know, maybe. But I think that the expansion of this theme and saying that what happens now is that can be true, right? That can be just as true. But we're not trying to justify what he did. Joker did terrible, terrible things. Again, this is different from me saying the execution was flawless, because I think that all also got buried there. But that was the point of the scene where he was in the courtroom and he was talking to Gary Puddles, and Gary Puddles said, "You ruined my life. You were nice to me, but then you ruined my life." Right? I think there are two things in contrast here that have to be squared, but there's a lot of tension there. The fact that this is a man, Arthur, who society just threw him away and just did so many terrible things to him, his mother, society, people, right? And on top of the fact that he had some mental struggles and mental illness, that this is a big deal, right? That society did this. But it's also true that Arthur did terrible, horrible, awful things. He killed 6 people, right? And the point of the movie is that was Arthur. That was not, there's no schizophrenia, at least as far as I could tell in this movie. Because again, sometimes it's hard to tell what, Todd Phillips is trying to say is real and what's not real. But I mean, I think the point of the movie, at least what Todd Phillips was trying to say, is that no, it was Arthur, who is an amalgamation of all these different things that have happened to him, but he still ended up doing terrible things. Now again, this is not me trying to justify the movie. This is me trying to say that when I tell you I believe there was a good movie buried somewhere in here, I genuinely mean that. Again, I have no intention, no desire of watching this film again, because at the end of the day, don't believe that movies should be, you shouldn't go into a movie and then come out of it and say, I need to rewatch that because that movie had good intentions. It is totally fine to be like, I can see a good movie in there, but I just believe that I just didn't like it and I don't want to watch it again. That is totally fine. That is how I feel with Joker Folie à Deux. I don't ever want to see this movie again, frankly, because it just didn't work for me and it wasn't a particularly enjoyable watch. But I also want to say that I do lament the fact, is what I wanted to say at the end of the day, that I do believe that there was brilliance and there was something interesting to say in this movie. And whether or not we enjoyed it, I think that, I think that there are a lot of interesting things to think about here as well. So Joker Folie à Deux is going to go down as probably one of the biggest disappointments in general, critically, financially, that there ever was. And I think that that's a shame because even though I personally am not someone who loved the first movie, I acknowledge that there were great performances and whatnot, great social commentary. I just didn't enjoy the first one. I'm disappointed. I want every movie that I watch to be really great, and I just wish that I liked this movie more. But I ask you guys, what do you think about what has been going on with Joker Folie à Deux since its release? Have you thought about the film any more since you watched it, and what do you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, so in the never-ending cycle that has been the casting for Lanterns, let's talk about our second official casting. Actually, both castings kind of became official just recently, but I suppose our second unofficial official casting, as we have gotten our second Green Lantern, technically our third Green Lantern in this DCU. But first things first, James Gunn on Instagram and Threads and whatnot has actually confirmed that Kyle Chandler is going to be playing Hal Jordan in the DCU. So that is an official confirmation. We don't have to speculate about that anymore. I know that we had done videos about it, but that was because the Hollywood Reporter had been reporting it in Deadline, and so we took that to the bank. But, the story of Lanterns, as it had been reported, was going to be a story about an older, more veteran Hal Jordan leading a younger, more inexperienced John Stewart Green Lantern as they, uncover crimes and go about, solving an intergalactic, or maybe, sorry, not intergalactic, but an earthbound mystery that had intergalactic implications. And so John Stewart naturally became the next casting choice, and it really does look like this Lantern series is picking up steam because we have our official, and this is official, casting for John Stewart. James Gunn has confirmed this. It is going to be Aaron Pierre is John Stewart. So, for those of you who don't know Aaron Pierre, we'll talk about who he is just a little bit because I'm also a little bit unfamiliar with him, but I'm sure he's going to do great. And then we'll just talk about, the momentum that this is bringing for the DCU. It looks like Lanterns is really picking up to be that second live-action TV series. And we're starting to get a better picture. I've talked about this a little bit before in previous segments, but I think we are starting to get a picture of the DCU slate. So, first things first, let's talk about Aaron Pierre as, not Hal Jordan, excuse me, I was almost going to say Hal Jordan. We've been talking about Hal Jordan so much on the Access Blockbusters pod, but no, as John Stewart. So, Aaron Pierre, for those of you who don't know, he is 30 years old, so right away, he is about the age that actors like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth were when they first took their roles as Captain America and Thor. And that sets him up to be John Stewart for as long as he wants and as long as James Gunn wants, right? Because, let's be honest, right? And I understand for all of you guys who are out there saying, I'm really bummed that Hal Jordan is not going to be the main Green Lantern, because I'm sure that there are many people out there. I personally don't read many comics myself, but I know that there are many people out there who really love Hal Jordan and wanted to see him done justice, no pun intended, because, the only live action version we've gotten for, any extended period of time was Ryan Reynolds, and I'm sure there are many people out there who like Ryan Reynolds as Green Lantern, but even Ryan Reynolds doesn't like Ryan Reynolds as Green Lantern. So I get that. I totally get that, because it looks like Hal Jordan is not going to be Green Lantern for that long. And we got Kyle Chandler, who I believe is in his 50s, and he's going to be Hal Jordan. But John Stewart, on the other hand, looks like he is being set up to be the main Green Lantern in the DCU going forward. And so I think it's exciting. I get it for those of you who are disappointed about the Hal Jordan just being an older character, maybe not being the main Green Lantern, but I think that we should all look forward to seeing John Stewart a different, version, not a different version, but just a different Green Lantern, because there are many Green Lanterns. We even have Guy Gardner appearing in Superman, and I think it's exciting. I think that, they have all the potential in the world, DC, to make John Stewart a really memorable character. I mean, I think we should, I'm including myself in this, we should all be open to the fact that just because it's not the Green Lantern that we envisioned, the Hal Jordan version, I think that, having John Stewart as the main Green Lantern will be a really, awesome choice, just depending on how this series is written. So, a little bit more about Aaron Pierre. So he's 30 years old. He's most well known for a show called Rebel Ridge, which I'm going to admit I haven't seen. I believe it's on Netflix, but apparently he is quite good. And then he was also in the show Krypton, I think. And so he has some minor experience with the DC universe. He actually was also going to be part of Blade at one point, and I'm sure his character was in some iteration of that draft. And whatever iteration that might have been is no longer the case, because he has since confirmed that he is no longer part of Blade. But it shows you that Hollywood has seen him as an up-and-comer, and even a studio like the MCU was also looking at him to play a part in their cinematic universe. So that's also encouraging to see. But actually, most notably for me and for this channel is he's going to be in a movie that A, he's not even going to be in, really, and B, hasn't even come out yet. But it's still notable that Aaron Pierre will star in Mufasa: The Lion King, which will be coming out in December 2024. And he, like I said, is not physically going to be in that movie unless something really weird and crazy happens towards the middle or the end. I don't know. The trailers make it seem like, no, he's just going to be voicing the young Mufasa. And I'm sure he'll do a great job. But I think that'll be my first big exposure to him as an actor. And obviously that won't even be, as an actor, because he'll just be recording lines. But I do think that, I'm really excited, because obviously how many of us had heard of Chris Hemsworth or Chris Evans? Mark Ruffalo, maybe to a lesser extent. Mark Ruffalo had some roles before he became the Hulk, but these are actors who really made names for themselves, taking on the mantle of iconic superheroes. Even Tom Holland, right? And so I'm excited, because I think that this is an opportunity for Aaron Pierre to make his marks and stamp what am I trying to say? Stamp a role, I guess, in the DCU as his own, and make it part of his legacy. And I think that that's really exciting. So I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the DCU. I'm excited for Lanterns. Now, like I said earlier, as we close out this segment, I think we're starting to get a better picture of the upcoming slate. And I think it's interesting that we're getting a better picture of these things just based on the production updates, because James Gunn has been pretty forthright with his production schedule, and I think that he's been pretty open and frank about just posting updates on when things are going to happen and what's going on with different projects. So let's just kind of run through this quickly. What we know for sure, and what we're pretty much suspecting, or what's almost confirmed to be happening. So what we know is that Creature Commandos is going to be starting out the DCU. It's going to be an animated series. It's going to be coming out in December 2024 into January 2025. Okay, so that's the first project. Then Superman will be coming out in July 2026. So, and also just based on what James Gunn had said earlier, he said what we're going to try to do is one movie and 2 shows. And so based on that, I think we'll get Peacemaker Season 2 in 2026. I would imagine probably in late 2026 fall, or even Christmas time 2025. So we'll get, the end of Creature Commandos in early 2025. We'll get Superman, and we'll get Peacemaker Season 2 in late 2025. It's what I think will happen. And then in 2026, it looks like we're really gunning for the Lantern series to be coming out probably, I would guess, in sometime in early to mid 2026. And then we'll have Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, I believe in June or July of 2026. And then it looks like, somebody asked James Gunn, have you made any progress with Paradise Lost? And it looks like we'll be getting that probably in late 2026 is my guess. Now, that's a little bit of a bummer, right? Because, and this is just what it is, right? I mean, James Gunn can only do so much in the time he's given. Unless he wants to make 6 projects a year, which has clearly not worked out. But the flip side to this is that, well, okay, so he announced a bunch of other things, and we know a bunch of other things are coming. We have Sergeant Rock that's coming out. We have a Bane Deathstroke movie apparently coming out. We have a Teen Titans movie coming out. We have Swamp Thing that was announced. We have Booster Gold that was announced. But these things aren't going to come until 2027, 2028, which is a little unfortunate, honestly. So I think it's good to get a big picture of the slate, but it's also a reminder that some of these projects are way far away. We're going to have to let the DCU really start to kick into high gear, and then we'll see what happens from there. By the way, I think I misspoke earlier. I think I said 1 movie and 2 shows. I think he said 2 movies and 2 shows, so we'll see. Eventually, they'll probably ramp it up, and maybe Swamp Thing will come out in 2026 or early 2027. We'll have to see about that. But guys, what do you think about the casting of John Stewart in Lanterns. Do you like the casting? Do you think Aaron Pierre is going to make a good John Stewart? And, what do you think about the pairing of him and Kyle Chandler? I'm sure they did plenty of screen tests together, and I'm sure that they did great, and I'm sure that James Gunn has all the confidence in the world with this pairing. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, we are officially on episode 5 of Agatha All Along. It is, I guess now, it's over halfway done. So we're here to talk about it. Agatha All Along wraps up on October 30th, I believe, or 29th? 30th, I think 30th, with episodes 8 and 9. And we're here to talk about Agatha episode 5. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion. So if you have not seen Agatha All Along episode 5, there are some spoilers in this episode. So I would recommend just putting this video or this segment or the podcast to watch later, and then coming back once you have seen Agatha All Along episode 5. Let's get into this. So just like I always do, I like to recap some of my thoughts so you know exactly where I'm coming from. Recapping my thoughts on the previous episodes, I thought that episodes 1 and 2 were really quite good, honestly. I think especially episode 1 was fun, and I think that episode 2 was, enjoyable, although perhaps not nearly as good as episode 1, but I thought it was enjoyable. I thought episode 3 introduced us to this format, right, of the Trials of the Witch's Road, and I thought, okay, I talked about this in my episode 3 reaction, or spoiler discussion, that I thought this concept could get tired pretty quickly, but for this episode, I thought it was actually quite entertaining. Fast forward to episode 4, and I think that the format got tired pretty quickly already. And I think that what episode 4 was with, the singing, the band. Yeah, I don't think it was for me. Because I know a lot of people have told me, and people in the comments have mentioned that, I really like the band part of episode 4. And that's awesome. That's, I really love that really resonated with a lot of you guys. Because I think that's what it's for, right? I think, Jack Schaefer was like, this is going to really, a lot of people are going to enjoy this band segment. So it just didn't really land for me. So, and the other distinction, I suppose, or so just something I talked about in the last spoiler discussion is that I think for me, right, one of the things that I'm not quite enjoying about Agatha All Along, at least with episode 3 and 4, and then, I assumed episode 5 would follow suit, and it did. I mean, it changed it up a little bit, sure, but it basically followed the same formula, is that I think there's a difference for me between a format and a formula. And I used one of my favorite shows, The West Wing, as an example. The West Wing has a format, right? You know that generally there's going to be multiple storylines with the different characters split up, and usually there's some big conflict, and either it gets resolved at the end and there's some kind of hopeful message, or it kind of leaves it ambiguous, but you know that different characters are dealing with different problems, and there's sort of an overarching conflict. But it can take many different shapes and sizes. It could be a bill trying to pass through Congress. It could be a government shutdown. It could be an impeachment trial. It could be all sorts of different things, right? Agatha All Along is really not playing with a format. It's playing with a formula. It's very formulaic, especially episodes 3, 4, and 5, because the formula is something kind of chaotic happens at the beginning of the episode on the Witch's Road. They then go into a house. There's a trial. They all have to work together. Somebody usually dies. Agatha, learns a lesson or something. They exit on the Witch's Road, and then they go on their merry way, and it's chaotic to begin the next episode. This is literally a formula that episodes 3, 4, and 5 have used. Now, like I said, it doesn't have to mean that I don't enjoy some parts of these episodes. I enjoyed a lot of episode 3. I thought, I'm not going to say I enjoyed a lot of episode 4, but that's just me personally. And episode 5, I will say I enjoyed bits and pieces of it, especially the trial part. Like, not especially the trial part, but in the trial part, there were bits and pieces in particular that I enjoyed. I thought that the last 5 minutes of this show, or of this episode, had some interesting things that were not quite set up, and then also some interesting things that will probably be paid off in next episode, one would hope. You can't end the episode with revealing that it's Billy Maximoff. We would assume, they never explicitly say, but Billy Maximoff, and not pay that off. Also, how did he get powers? How did he remember how to use magic, etc., etc.? There are all sorts of things that this show needs to answer. Luckily, what this show has in its favor is that usually for Disney Plus MCU shows or Star Wars shows, we're asking these questions in the second to last episode, and then they just don't pay it off in the next episode because it's the finale. Like, how could you pay off all these different questions? This is, I think, at the very least, it's better because now you're asking these questions in the midway point, and then you have plenty of time, we hope, to flesh out these different things as we go along. So anyways, we'll get to the teen Billy reveal at the very end of the segment. But let's start out here. And the first thing I always check, just out for my own curiosity, is how long these episodes are. And I checked. I always skip the previously on, even though I caught a tiny bit of it, and it was the scene from WandaVision where she's taking the power from the other witches. So I kind of knew, okay, there's going to be something about her backstory here with the witches and Salem. And I knew that. But that's the reason specifically why I skipped the previously on, because I don't want to know what kind of things are being hinted at towards, for the coming episode I'm about to watch. It's not like I'm not going to watch the episode. I'm going to watch the episode. So Salem, the Salem witch trials, we're going to be playing some part in it. And sure enough, the episode opens and the Salem 7 are coming. And, for some reason, they weren't as creepy as they were in episode 2. I thought in episode 2 they were quite scary, actually. And maybe it's just the way that they were shot in episode 2 versus in episode 5, but they were just kind of scuttling around, and I don't know, it wasn't as scary as I thought it probably should have been. But the Salem 7 are there on the Witches' Road, and they're coming after Agatha. I guess. I did think that there was a pretty funny line when they're talking about, the Salem 7, I guess, are the daughters or the children of the witches that Agatha took the power from. And there's a funny line where Agatha says, "Mercy is overrated." And then she says, "Let's go." And I thought that was kind of funny, actually. It was a quick line, but it made me chuckle as she said it. So, that was pretty funny. But, it was dynamic. At least it was, things were happening. It was a little more interesting. There's some danger on the Witch's Road. But then, what always pulls me out of this show is that the MCU has generally been pretty grounded, right? And I say that even a little bit in jest because, when we get to the magical parts of the MCU, it's not like when Doctor Strange, the furthest he'll go is he'll pluck a little bit of Thor's hair out as he makes a spell, or Spider-Man's hair. But it's not like every time he conjures a sling ring, or he has the sling ring portal, or he casts, a spell or whatever, or uses the time stone, that he has to start muttering in Latin, and he just has to spin around in circles 6 times. I like all that stuff is just kind of silly to me. So the fact that this show is really leading into it, I'm just not a fan of it, honestly. When they had to get the brooms and they start spinning around and saying things, I was like, this looks really silly to me. Because I think part of the fun of the MCU's magic thus far has just been that it's just part of the fabric of the universe, and there are some people that can use it, tap into it. It's almost like energy, and it's not like, Latin, just random Latin things and spinning in circles and holding hands and, Ouija boards, which we'll get to Ouija boards. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that. And they're using this ritual to get to broomsticks. And again, I think, on top of just it being a little bit silly to me, although I will say it does give off, at least towards the beginning, some Harry Potter vibes, which is fun. I think it's fun. I haven't seen people riding a broomstick since Harry Potter, which has been a long time. So that's cool. That's fun. It does look incredibly fake, I think, when they're in the sky. Maybe that's just me, but when they're floating in the sky, I was like, no, they're just kind of sitting on something and there's a green screen here. But whatever. It's something, And then they get into the trial and they head into the house, and it was something, like I said, following the formula, something kind of interesting happens at the beginning of the episode, and then they are on their way to the next trial. So yeah, the formula, it's getting a little bit old. I have reason to hope that in episode 6 and onward that they're not just going to rehash this formula, because you've revealed some interesting stuff at the end of this episode, but we'll see. I mean, who knows? We'll have to see. So then we get into this trial and we have to use a Ouija board. And again, I think it's fine. Apologies for the background noise, by the way. There's some stuff going on outside. I think it's fine that, like, if you want to use, things from other horror films or whatever, I think it's fine. It's totally fine. The problem I have with this is it's almost like a bunch of fans of horror movies are just trying to point out things, or fans of movies are just trying to point out things that they want the audience to also be like, hey, look, it's this thing. Let's look at this thing. There's the thing. It's a Ouija board, because Ouija boards are scary in movies. And I mean, yeah, I didn't watch those Ouija movies, to be fair, and I heard they were pretty bad. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I thought I remembered them being pretty bad from what people said. And even despite that, the trailers freaked me out, right? Like, I'm not a big horror person. Ouija boards, bare minimum, should freak me out. no matter what. And nothing about this Ouija board was scary. It was just comical. And maybe that's what they're going for, in which case, that's great. I just have to acknowledge that it's just not for me, because I said at the beginning, if you're gonna go for horror, please go for horror, even if I'm not the target audience for that. And it doesn't seem like that's really what they're doing, not since episode 2 and episode 3, really. Have there been, because I think the Agatha crawling around thing, even you have to understand, I get scared at a lot of things. I'm not the target audience for horror. But even I was watching that going, this is a little silly, isn't it? Isn't it? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe you guys were freaked out and I just have no soul. Maybe. I don't know. Anyways, they start using the Ouija board and it spells out Mrs. Hart. And when it spelled out Mrs. Hart, I was like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. And sure enough, it's Agatha faking it. So yeah, there is that. They ask who's there and it says Death. There are a bunch of rumors that Rio Vidal is playing Death, but it seems like Agatha was controlling the board anyways. So we'll see. Maybe she seems to know who Rio Vidal really is, because I'm sure she's not just Rio Vidal. And so I'm sure she probably is Death. I don't know what that means. I suppose that's interesting. But again, we'll just have to see how it's executed. So the witches then start turning on Agatha because apparently the Ouija board says to punish Agatha. And then she is on the ceiling and then she starts crawling around and her skin looks crazy. And yeah, and then there's a ghost because there's Agatha's mom is a ghost now. And I guess the MCU has ghosts now. Somebody needs to explain to me all the different afterlives that the MCU has. Like there is Valhalla. We saw Heimdall, we saw Jane Foster there. And I guess there are other, out of the Soul Realm, for example, with the Infinity Stones, and there are ghosts in the MCU, which are interesting. So there is that. The then there's this scene where Agatha tries to draw out the magic, or I guess Alice was trying to protect Agatha, and then Agatha, claims she doesn't know what she's doing, but then she draws out the magic from Alice, and the CGI here looks pretty fake. I'm not gonna lie, like especially Alice's magic, it looks incredibly fake to me, and that's a little concerning because I'm sure there's going to be some big CGI stuff happening later on, and I hope that it looks a little bit better. So yeah, I guess Agatha at this point was taking her power, taking Alice's power, and then also apparently Nicholas Scratch is here, so Death and Nicholas Scratch are there, and that never really gets resolved. Maybe it'll get resolved in the next episode, but we'll have to see about that. Alice is dead. Rest in peace, Alice. We hardly knew you. I think that's one of the problems with this show for me, is that they want us to laugh at the sort of shticky, not gimmicky, that's the wrong word. It's not gimmicky, it's just sort of the parody elements of the different shows and the different genres and the different elements of different genres. And that's fine. We're meant to enjoy them and we're meant to have fun and have, be it like a popcorn, have it be like a popcorn kind of television show. But then you have these scenes, right, where Agatha seems so hurt by the fact that, people are betraying her or whatever. And maybe that's just a ruse. Maybe that's just a farce, because at the end of the episode, she seems to do a 180 again. So maybe she's faking it. So who knows? But then, there's a scene like Teen, just so distraught over the death of Alice. And I'm like, where in this show have we seen, other than just Teen being nice to Alice and vice versa, and maybe talking to her a couple of times, when have we shown anywhere in these 30-minute episodes that Teen had any real connection to Alice? I don't know. It just didn't land with me, if that makes sense. So, yeah, they escaped the trial, and then the interesting stuff starts to happen, just like it did in the last episode, where we start to learn more about Rio and Agatha, even though we didn't get any payoff for that in this episode, which I was bummed out about, which, makes me think that probably next episode we won't get anything else about Teen. I find that hard to believe, but based on the way that these Disney Plus shows have been going, I don't know. I really don't know. But honestly, when Teen confronts Agatha, and then Agatha smiles, and she says, "Are you sure?" That was her smile, and that scene was scarier than anything in the entire show thus far. It was creepy. Catherine Hahn, the way that she can kind of contort her face to make that smile look even bigger somehow, is really scary, honestly. It is quite terrifying. And then she says the line that, I think will probably stand out from this episode. She says, "You look so much like your mother." So, okay, she knows who he is. And I think it's interesting now to reveal at the midway point of this series that she knows more than she's letting on, which I think we knew that. But I think the question is, the show is called Agatha All Along, which we haven't paid that much attention to the title thus far. But I think it's interesting to think about what is it all along? What is she behind, in this series? Is it just a clever parody or a clever retaking of the title of the song in WandaVision, or is there something that she's actually behind in this series? And it looks like we're getting a little bit of a hint of that. Maybe when Teen comes to rescue her from the spell that she sent him somehow, or Nicholas Scratch sent him, or I don't know. Who knows? Like maybe I'm sure she had something to do with this, because obviously Wanda's kids were not quote unquote real. So maybe we'll get a flashback where just before the hex comes, Agatha is in the hex and she, or the hex ends, I should say. She takes Billy and something happens. I don't know. She manifests him as real or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure we'll figure this out eventually. I just hope it's in the next episode rather than being in episode 9, if that makes sense. But she says, "You look so much like your mother." Does he? Maybe. I don't know. I personally don't see it, but maybe. I'm only calling that out here because I don't really care about casting. Like, you don't have to cast someone who looks exactly like Elizabeth Olsen, but Agatha did call it out, so I was wondering about that. And then the show is getting interesting. So this is Billy, and now we have to just figure out why, and I'm sure it'll be in episode 6. And I again, like I said, I guess it's better that it was in episode 5 that this happened rather than episode 8 of the show. Also wanted to note that Rio Vidal is nowhere to be seen. I think I might have missed it, but I don't think she's anywhere. So interesting. And the episode ends with a blue crown on Teen's head, on Billy's head, and then he finds his magic again. So I wonder where that came from. I wonder if he had known all this time. I think that, there's an interesting thing that could be happening here, or maybe Teen is the villain. Billy is the villain of this show, and he is in league with Rio, who is Death, or something like that. Again, we saw Rio enter the illusion, the hex in Agatha in the first episode of Agnes of Westview, and we saw then Teen also infiltrate the Vision. And while he and Rio don't seem to have that much in common, who knows, right? Who knows? Joe Locke recently gave an interview where he said he had to play many different versions of the character through the auditions, and he learned more and more about this character and how he'd have to play a different side of him as the show progressed. So we'll see. I would personally be in favor of a twist like this, where Agatha knew more than she was letting on, but then also Teen is the bad guy, and he's in league with Rio somehow. And if Rio is Death or Mephisto or whatever, I don't really care. But I think that there's something interesting there. I'm a little bummed that it took this long to get to something interesting like this. And if the show just goes right back next episode to, well, it can't, right? It can't. I don't know, because Agatha, Lilia, and Jennifer Kale are buried in the mud, and I'm sure they're going to get out in the next episode. But if the next episode is them just getting out of the mud and then running to the next house, and Teen and Rio are outside the house or something like that, and they're doing the next trial, I would just be a little bit bummed, because for me personally, the formula is getting a little bit old. And, I want to say, as I wrap up my thoughts on this episode, is that I'm not here just to be negative for the sake of being negative. I'm here to point out the facts. Not facts. I shouldn't say facts, because these are all just my own subjective opinions, but just to point out the ways in which the show is not working for me personally. But that doesn't mean the show doesn't have to work for you, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who love the first 5 episodes, all of them, holistically, individually, of Agatha All Along. And I'm just not one of them. I think that the show has its ups and it has its downs. To me, and I know nobody wants to hear me talk about Rings of Power anymore. It's fine. I'm going to talk about it. I think, for me, it follows a similar trajectory of Rings of Power, where episode 1, I really liked. I think I liked episode 1 of Rings of Power a lot more than I did episode 1 of Agatha All Along. But still, the next few episodes were honestly stumbles for me for Rings of Power. But then the show picked it up. And it picked it up in a dramatic way. And so if episodes 6, 7, and 8, and 9 come out, and they're all really solid as we're building towards the final conflict here, I'm on board, right? I think we start to hit a tipping point if episode 6 is kind of like this, if episode 7 is kind of like this, maybe episode 8 is really good, and then episode 9 is kind of like this. Then I think Agatha All Along falls in the bucket of, I don't know, projects like She-Hulk and projects like The Marvels and Secret Invasion and whatnot. But we'll have to see. We will have to see about that. So guys, let me know what you thought about episode 5 of Agatha All Along. Did you enjoy it? Is it the best of the entire series for you? Is it the worst? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as we continue the conversation in the comments. All right, guys, let's talk Penguin episode 3. I have been so immensely enjoying this show. And like I said, I've said it a couple times now, but I want to reiterate that this is not the kind of show that I typically enjoy watching. I think even as we'll talk about my thoughts on this latest episode, and I have a lot of thoughts on this latest episode, but I just want to reiterate, like this, the types of shows that I enjoy personally are usually the ones that I can watch over and over again, that I can feel sort of hopeful at the end of it, and sort of, I'm a sucker for those hope springs eternal, there's always redemption, like those kinds of stories. But I'd like to think I can always appreciate a story that's not in that vein when I see it. And Penguin is obviously not in that vein. This is a story about Oz Cobb, who is clearly not a good person, but also clearly a complicated person. And while this may not be quote unquote my type of show, I'm going to say it right now. Penguin episode 3 might have been one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. We're going to talk about it in full spoilery detail. I can't wait to talk about it because every twist and turn, every bit of pacing, every reveal, every, zig, every zag just had me so amazed at what this show is able to do. So we are going to be talking about the Penguin episode 3 in full spoilery detail. If you have not seen the episode, make sure to save this podcast, this segment, and watch it later. Come back to it once you have seen episode 3 because we are going to be talking in full spoilery detail. So episodes 1 and 2, they're starting to blur together to me because it's been such quality television. It's been 2 whole hours before episode 3 of television. Each episode is almost exactly an hour long, which is insane. Like, that's not even including credits. Including credits, it's like an hour and 6 minutes or something like that. It's been incredible to see. At the end of episode 2, we saw a partnership between Sophia Falcone and Penguin begin to develop. And we're going to see here in this episode a little bit more of that backstory unveiled. And apparently there's some animosity there between the two. And I mean, by the end of this episode, it doesn't look like it's getting any better. So let's jump into it. I've taken notes as always, and we'll kind of talk through the main story points and things I was observing as I was watching the episode. So one thing that this episode did, this episode was an episode about Vic. And I've said it, in both episode 1 and episode 2 spoiler discussions. Initially, when Vic came on and it was clear that Vic was going to become a main character, I was not so sure about that. I thought, do we really need Penguin training a kid? Do we need another extraneous, quote-unquote extraneous side character to be joining this show? Every single episode has done so much work to humanize this character, to endear him to us. And it's incredible. It's only quote-unquote 2 episodes, but those 2 hours of content have done so much that by the time this episode ends, my heart broke for this character, for Vic, a character that I've only spent 2 hours with, and yet I was so heartbroken over what the decisions that he made towards the end of this episode. I was rooting for this kid, and to see him kind of fall back into the clutches of the Penguin, so to speak, it was truly devastating to me. But we start out this episode, and I thought, I was wondering, because we saw those text messages from Graciela, and I was wondering, okay, so is he, is this later? Did he find a way to sneak out and see her? And it turns out, we learn as, I think it was through the TV that they're talking about breaking news about the mayoral election, that this is actually the day of the Riddler bombs and the day of the very end of the Batman, which I think is such an awesome thing to do. One thing I love that superhero movies and shows have been doing more and more recently, it's not recently, for the past 10 years or so, pretty much ever since Civil War and Batman v Superman, is talking about collateral damage, right? Talking about how these crazy things, right? Things falling from the sky, superheroes coming to this earth, and crime-fighting vigilantes and villains coming up, what that does to affect real people like you and me. People who are working jobs, people who are trying to make ends meet, people who have such good intentions, how the effects of these acts of heroism can, save millions of lives, but also really, unintentionally cause some things to happen. Like the way that villains rise up is because of things that heroes do. It's what Vision said in Civil War, that since Tony Stark unveiled himself as Iron Man, the rate of supervillainy has risen exponentially. And there's a reason for that. You see that here in a show like this. And so it's really great that this show understood that it needed to take some time now to humanize Vic. This is a Vic episode, and I loved it, which if you told me this during episode 1, like right at the beginning of episode 1, when we were introduced to Vic, I would have been like, that's crazy. I don't think I would have enjoyed an episode basically just about Vic, or at least emotionally centered around Vic. But here we are. And this is the backstory. So we get to see his family, we get to see his parents, we get to see Graciela, and it's just devastating. And it's sort of the classic, we see the sort of classic Spider-Man motif, right, of how he gets angry at his family, gets angry at his parents, he storms out, and he never gets to speak to them again. It's sort of a classic tried and true trope, but I think it's pretty effective here to just show that, he is living through the trauma and living through the guilt of the flooding. And by the way that those bombs went off, the way that the water began to flood, and there was that one shot in particular that's still sticking with me even now, of where the water is going so fast that it just bursts through the windows, and you have to imagine it just killing and drowning everybody in sight immediately. It was devastating to watch. The way that they shot that and filmed that, it was incredible in a horrific kind of way. And I just so appreciated the way that the visuals conveyed the story without having to say a single word. So the opening prologue was so incredibly powerful here, and just devastating, just absolutely devastating. So now we get back to present day. We see Vic with Penguin. We see Vic with Oz. And I really like these conversations here. It's setting up the sort of betrayal at the end of this episode, but the conversations at the beginning where, he's, Oz is being nice, right? He's like, oh, hey, I get it. You need to ask for things and I'll give you $1,000 a week. And Vic is like, okay, I want 2,000. And Penguin's like, that's what I'm talking about. But no. It's a good line. It's a fun line. And I think it shows the dynamic that they're really warming up to one another, or at least Oz is warming up to Vic, because Vic's life is about to get a whole lot more complicated here. But the dynamic between these two characters, and the fact that not only is Vic I think Vic is the lens through which we should see this show, like our entrance into the show, because I realized if it was just Oz and Sophia, it would be a great, thrilling gang war, crime drama, right? But because we have a character like Vic, the writers are smart enough to understand that now we have an emotional stake in this where, yeah, like Oz is being humanized for what it's worth in certain ways, and he's not just the maniacal bad guy. He has motives and things like that. But if things happen to Oz, we're like, okay, well, he's a bad guy, right? But if things happen to Vic, all of a sudden, it's different now. It's complicated now. And I think that that's a really brilliant thing. Sophia comes into the apartment, and she is still terrifying, just the way that she talks to Vic. We get to see a little bit of emotion in her throughout this episode, which I think it works well to make the parts where she is terrifying even scarier, honestly. But she's crazy scary. I mean, just the fact that he's like, I'm a mechanic, and she's like, really? Why can't you work a lighter? So scary. So scary. I would hate to be in a room with her. I mean, I think that these scenes are just so full of tension. It's one of the things that the show does incredibly well. Then we move on here to, we get a little bit more backstory, actually, as Sophia and Penguin are going to this drug lab here. And Sophia mentions, I think for the first time, that Penguin used to be her driver. And we'll get little layers peeled back as the show continues on. But it's interesting that, Penguin is a character who always felt disrespected and always felt like he was the underling, and he's trying to work his way through the top here by whatever means possible. But he did, kind of start from the bottom as Sophia's driver, and then there was some betrayal that we'll talk about towards the end of this episode. So I think that is, something that is really interesting that they were revealing as well. Then we get to this crime lab, and I guess I would have, I don't know what it was, because I know not to get too much into drugs and whatnot, but we know mushrooms are drugs, psychedelics, right? But it felt a little strange to just see them growing mushrooms. I'm not gonna lie, and yeah, I mean, I think it felt a little bit more abstract in a good way. That later on in the episode they just had vials of the stuff, but yeah, I mean, whatever. It's meant to be a drug lab, and yeah, that's all it is. So anyways, not to dwell on that too much, but we get to see that, and I guess that's interesting as well. Seems like seems like a Scarecrow kind of tactic. I guess Scarecrow is more fear toxins, and this is more about the sort of selling to the masses, if you will. But yeah, and then we get a scene here where Graciela meets Vic again at the apartment, and right away, I actually thought my first instinct was, oh no, Graciela's in trouble, because just the fact that we have a character here who we're meant to be somewhat attached to, where, she's related to Vic's character arc. I kind of thought immediately she's probably going to die by the end of this episode. They went a little bit of a different route, still equally as tragic here. But, yeah, it's like, the dilemma then is presented of how in the world are you going to leave Vic? Because she's like, you could come with me. And it's like, yeah, of course you should go with her. But how? Because he's seen things, and it's like, how in the world are you going to escape the clutches of a madman, calculating madman who knows you've seen everything that he's done? It's crazy. It's crazy. Next scene is Johnny Vitti, who, very interesting character is what I will say. He threatened Sophia, and immediately I knew, yeah, he's in trouble. And he was in trouble because of what happens a little bit later. Because, it's interesting. There's so much precariousness also going on here. People are lying to one another. And when they're meeting, when Penguin and Sophia are meeting the sort of intermediary guy in Chinatown, and they're, Penguin's like, oh, of course Vitti's on her side. You have to, immediately in my mind was like, uh-oh, how in the world are they going to pull that off? Turns out Penguin had that file. I totally forgot about that file, and he knew about Vitti being with the wife of Luca's wife. So I totally forgot about that. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that it's so precarious because people are lying all the time. It's like, really the question of this show for me at every turn is, how are you going to get out of this, right? How in the world is Penguin going to get out of this mess? So yeah, there you go. Then they have the Penguin and Vic have a lunch conversation, and it's surprisingly emotional and genuine. It almost feels like Oz is truly starting to open up to this guy Vic. And of course, if you asked Oz, he would never admit that he's growing attached to this kid, but he is. By the way, I've never been so uncomfortable when hearing the word steak frites in my life. I know it's not Vic's fault. Obviously, Vic has a stutter, but the way that Penguin was approaching it and was like, nope, just let him say it. It was just a very tense-filled scene in a very completely different way. So steak frites is what I'm going to take out of this anyways. It was a really well acted and really well written scene. But yeah, Oz, look, he's a terrible person, but interesting, to hear some of the points he's making, and not to get too political or anything like that, but it's social commentary, right? He says the American dream, should not be set up so that honest, hardworking people don't get a fair shot. And I think that a lot of us, in fact, almost all of us would agree with that. But the difference here for Oz is that he wants to do it through crime and through a gang war, through whatever means possible. And I think that's sort of the difference here. It's like, are you going to stick up for your morals? Later on, as Vic is talking to Oz in the bathroom, Vic says, my father would be so ashamed. And Oz says something like, it doesn't matter. It's about survival. There's no good. There's no bad. Interestingly, kind of a line in the Thunderbolts trailer. But this is obviously being way more nuanced and way more, I don't know, just real about it, I guess, in a way, than I think the Thunderbolts will be. Just a guess. Thunderbolts might be also talking about these things as well. I don't know. But anyways, it's really interesting to hear these things from a character that is merciless and will do whatever he can to get to the top, but also just saying honest things, right? Like, of course we think that if a person works hard, they deserve to do well in life, and it just unfortunately just doesn't happen, and often it just doesn't happen. And so I think that is also really interesting social commentary as well. And yeah, it's like, this moment of when Vic is thinking about leaving, Oz is really complimentary of him and saying his father would be really proud. It's such a back and forth here. It's crazy. And yeah, I felt that tension throughout the entire episode. So then Oz and Sophia confront Vitti, very embarrassing for him, and he calls Mr. Zhao the salesperson. I forget the exact name that they were talking about with him, but he makes the call. It's like, as soon as Vitti insults Oz, he just goes after him, and Sophia's watching. Again, another kind of terrifying scene from Sophia. Yeah, we move on to the club scene, and they have a little bit more backstory here with Oz and Sophia, where Sophia is like, hey, you're the reason that I went to Arkham, and they'll talk about this towards the very end of the episode. But Vic is the guy with the bag, and I think what's interesting also is that Vic is going around, and then Sophia and Oz are having their conversation with Mr. Zhao, and you can see how annoyed she's getting, how frustrated she's getting with Oz for taking over the sales pitch to Zhao. And Yeah, I mean, I think that this is about a female character who is so fed up with patriarchal norms and with men telling her what to do all the time that it's happening again, right? Oz is just taking over the pitch kind of unknowingly, and she's not happy with him. So yeah, Vic is then he's carrying around the bag, and I think it's so effective. This is one of the most brilliant scenes I've seen in a long time, where the bombs that we saw at the beginning of the episode, which were shot so viscerally, right? Because in the Batman, I think you see it from a distance, right, in the harbor and whatnot. But here you see it up close, and the flashing lights and everything turns into this PTSD for Vic, and it's so incredibly sad. I am becoming more and more and more sympathetic to this character, and the more I watch this show, the more I think this guy is not going to make it out of the show. I'm going to be, if he dies at the end of the show, I am going to be just absolutely devastated, because I'm sure the Penguin will be back in future Batman movies, but Vic, I don't know. I don't want Vic to break bad. He has such a good heart, but he's taking steps towards breaking bad. And if he doesn't break bad, if he has a moment of redemption, I feel like he's gonna die, and it's just gonna break my heart. So I'm mentally preparing for it, but we'll see. We'll have to see what happens here. And then Vic has a conversation with Oz in the bathroom, which is another fantastic scene. Where Oz is like, you think you're my prisoner? And he holds a gun to his head, and he's like, this is what you think it feels like. And it's just it's so sad. But then Oz lets him walk away. And I wonder if Vic really went with Graciela, if Oz would have let him go, because he knows Vic knows a lot of stuff. So that's what's so heartbreaking about this, is because you have this scenario of what if Oz actually let Vic go? And Vic, there's an alternate universe in which, obviously, we want to see more from the character of Vic, but there's a universe in which I'm so happy that he goes on the bus and he has a really nice 3-episode arc, and I just feel so happy for the character, because whatever Oz is up to in Gotham City, Vic is out there in California making a life for himself. But that's not in the cards. It doesn't look like, and I'm just so devastated. I hope he gets his happy ending. I hope he goes to California at the end of the series. I just don't think it's going to happen. And again, the way that I'm talking about these characters, it shows how invested I am in their stories. I really care about what happens to this kid. He is the best, the person with the best intentions, the best heart, who's just gotten stuck in this terrible situation. And it's so incredibly sad. It's so incredibly sad. So anyways, he drives over and sees the bus, and he decides to stay ultimately. And we'll get back to that in the very last shots of this episode. But before we do, we get some more backstory between Sophia and Penguin. And I guess from what I'm able to piece together, looks like Carmine, there was something going on between Carmine and Sophia, I guess. And then looks like Penguin, to save his own skin, ratted her out. And because of that, Carmine sent her to Arkham, which is crazy. So it looks like Sophia maybe... they're all part of a gang, sort of a mob mentality, literal mob, I guess, kind of thing. But crime family, that's the word I was looking for, crime family. But maybe it was the case that Sophia was not as bad of a person, before she was sent to Arkham. And obviously, if your own family sends you to Arkham, you're going to have some bitterness about that, so to speak. And I think that that's a really interesting backstory. And then, there's this sort of seemingly genuine apology, but then just as we get that, and just as Sophia is starting to maybe think, maybe I can trust this guy, the Marones show up, and it's just, the pacing in this show is incredible. We're not allowed to sit in that moment of, oh, maybe there's going to be some genuine, partnership between these two characters, because I kind of thought maybe this is a turning point for Penguin. Obviously, bad people doing bad things, but maybe this is the point where Penguin's like, I'm going to be a little more honest, I'm going to be a little more loyal to Sophia. I mean, maybe he's hoping that she'll let him get to the top in some capacity, but, maybe he's going to be a little more loyal to Sophia. And then the Marones show up, and then Victor shows back up, and Penguin escapes, and it's immediately out the window, because Penguin is like, nope, let's leave Sophia behind. And so now we end the episode in a crazy place where, just as Sophia was beginning to trust Penguin, maybe Penguin leaves her for, to the Marones, and the secret's out, I guess. The Marones, I'm sure the Marones will tell Sophia that Penguin was playing the both of them. They're going to go after Penguin. It's only 3 episodes into this show. I can't believe it. I can't believe how good this show is. It is, I'm just at a loss for words every time I watch an episode. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like this isn't the kind of show where I'm going to rewatch it over and over again. It's not the kind of show where I get, I feel such joy and happiness. But it's a show that's so riveting and engaging. And I I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed. So guys, what did you think about episode 3 of The Penguin? Was this, your favorite episode of the 3? Was this perhaps one of your favorite episodes of all time? I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking of many episodes of television. I mean, a couple like the Stranger Things season 4 finale come to mind. That was a brilliant finale. A few episodes of The West Wing. But no, I mean, this is perhaps just one of the greatest single episodes of television that I've ever seen. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought about The Penguin episode 3. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. And to round out today's episode of Access Blockbusters Pod, I thought we'd do something fun today. Barring anything crazy happening between the time I record, the main podcast and the time I edit it, because then we'll have something else to talk about and I'll add it in here. But in the meantime, let's do something fun here. So there are a lot of scoopers out there, a lot of people who claim to have inside information on things like, DC, Star Wars, and particularly with Marvel. Now, I, along with, I'm sure some of you guys, follow these accounts, not because I particularly take half of what they say seriously. In fact, I kind of find myself laughing sometimes at the rumors that they're reporting as, factual or whatnot. And to be fair, right? They get some things right because I'm sure that they do have people who are actually knowledgeable, right? But I don't think half of what they say is generally true. I'm not saying a blanket statement against scoopers. I've said this many times before that I think we need to also remind ourselves that for everything that they get right, they also get things wrong too. And so we shouldn't just treat them like The Hollywood Reporter or Variety, who almost always, or Deadline, who almost always have really specific and correct information about situations in Hollywood. That being said, I have been following these accounts and I have seen many rumors that as I'm looking for stories to talk about throughout the week and compiling them so that I can put them in the next episode of Access Blockbusters Pod, I look at these, right? And they're flashy headlines, like, oh, X actor confirmed in X role. And I'm like, oh, great, I can talk about that. That's awesome news. And then I look at the source and it's X scooper. And I go, well, I as somebody who really genuinely believes in giving you accurate information, I only want to talk about things as news if they're actually news, right? Now, I've talked about things that have been rumored in the past only as vehicles for discussion. For example, there was a rumor that Moon Knight Season 2 and Miss Marvel Season 2 were being greenlit. That wasn't news. Nobody's confirmed that. It was just a rumor from a scooper. And I said, okay, let's just talk about it. Let's talk about what I'd like to see if they did make those two things as an example. So there's that. So what I'm about to say, all these rumors that we're going to talk about here, there's a reason that I'm going to be, ranking them and not ranking them, but, rating them and talking about how much I believe them or not, because I don't think a lot of these are true. But because they're out there and because I think that they're interesting enough to talk about, I wanted to talk about them. So I've compiled a list here of several rumors that I've heard over the last, I'd say, month or so. Let's say couple weeks, because, I think a lot of these have been circulating for a while and then some have come up in recent days. And what I'm going to do is go through them, not necessarily in a particular order, although the last couple I think are more interesting than others. The last few, I should say. In fact, I'm going to move one over. I'm actually going to do this live here as I'm recording, and let's move this one up. So, most of them aren't in any particular order, but a couple of them, especially towards the end, I find more interesting, and I want to end with those. So we're going to be going through a bunch of rumors. I'm not going to be talking about each one in depth because this podcast is already way too long, and I'm going to be doing a quick rating, 1 out of 10. Let's even do 1 out of 5, and with decimals, like 0.5 decimals, 1.5, 2, 3.5, whatever. And let's rate them. I'm going to rate them on how likely I think that they are to be true. Regardless of whether the scooper themselves is right, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm just here to talk about, in general, do I think that these things are right or not? So, let's start out here with an interesting one. There's a rumor that Sam Raimi is going to be directing Doctor Strange 3. And on a personal note, I am not a big fan of this. I say this as somebody who I think generally liked Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness more than most people did. You can go check out my rewatch video of it on the channel. In that video, I said, it's not my favorite movie. In fact, the writing is not great. And I think that it's kind of aimless in, the middle portion of it, but it's fine. It's entertaining. So that being said, that's not a ringing endorsement to begin with. But one of the things I didn't love about Doctor Strange 2 was the Sam Raimi-ness of it all. I don't see necessarily what he adds to a Doctor Strange franchise that you go, yes, I need that back. One can understand I understood why they brought back Taika Waititi to direct Thor Love and Thunder, even though Thor Love and Thunder is my least favorite project in Phase 4. But Thor Ragnarok was one of my favorite projects in Phase 3, and what made that film so good was a lot of Taika Waititi's influence. So you can understand, I definitely would have done the same thing, bring him back for a fourth Thor film. But Sam Raimi, I don't know. I don't want it, personally. I would much rather them go... Again, a lot of people have been clamoring for Scott Derrickson to come back. That's fine. I would like that. But any other director to get have a different shot, different take on Doctor Strange as we probably wrap up his trilogy here in the MCU. So that's my own personal thought, my own personal feelings. Is it likely? I don't know, honestly, because I don't know if Kevin Feige had a particularly good experience with him. I don't know. Maybe he saved Doctor Strange 2 because it was being rewritten so much. I don't know, genuinely. So I'm going to put this at a 5. I said I'm doing it at a 5. So let's do a 2.5 out of 5. I think it could go either way, honestly. And actually, you know what? I'm pulling an audible. I kind of hate the 5 system. Let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's just do 1 through 10. I'm going to put it at a 5 out of 10. I think that it could go either way because I think that there are things that probably I don't know. Maybe Sam Raimi was a great director and it just turned out that the movie wasn't great, but Kevin Feige is like, I think you have a great idea for Doctor Strange 3. Let's do it. That's possible, right? That's definitely possible. On the other hand, I guess one more thing to the pro column, Doctor Strange 2 made $900 million. It's hard to ignore. It's hard to ignore that. But I think also Feige is smart enough to go, well, that film wasn't particularly well received, comparatively, and I don't know, maybe it's time to go in a new direction, right? So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. All right, let's move on to the next one here. This is wild. Apparently, there's a rumor that Marvel is developing a Tommy Shepard / Tommy Maximoff show. Just like how, spoilers, I guess, just like how it appears that Billy Maximoff is getting the limelight in recent MCU projects. It looks like, or not looks like, it has been reported by some that Tommy Maximoff is getting his own project. I'm giving this a 2. It's not impossible. I mean, nothing in the MCU is impossible at this point. It's not impossible. But with the mandate to, make less content, right? And really focus in on the quality. And of all characters, Tommy Maximoff, right? I don't know. Like, make Young Avengers, sure. And put Tommy and Billy in that show. But to make a show about a teenager, Tommy Maximoff, I can't imagine it's a movie, so make a show about him? No, I give it a 2. I might even give it a 1. I'll give it a 1. Something about it says that, just because I give it a 1 means it's going to happen. I'll give it a 2. I think it's a 2 out of 10. I just can't see this happening. In what world is this going to happen? I give it a 2 out of 10. So there's that. Another rumor that's been pretty persistent for the last, I'd say, year or so is that they're developing a Silver Surfer project, I should say. And, I think that there's a fair amount of reasons to believe that this is true, but there are also reasons enough to believe that it's not. And I think, it just depends. I think the one thing I come back to is output, right? How much are they really willing to go, especially with kind of how full the slate is with Ironheart and Nova and, Wonder Man. I don't know how many projects they're going to want. That being said, the one argument I can say that probably goes in favor of this, I also should have mentioned Vision. Vision is also a show that's coming, is that maybe Silver Surfer is one of the linchpin characters of the Fantastic Four First Steps, and maybe he becomes very important, he or she, because I know there are different versions, and I know actually it's going to be she, so maybe, she in the Fantastic Four film. So maybe this is I forget her name. I forget the female Silver Surfer's name. I also don't know the male Silver Surfer's name, to be fair. So maybe it's, she becomes a linchpin in the MCU, and it's actually a really interesting thing to do a Silver Surfer movie or show. That's fine. And it could even come. Here's the big reason why I think this is more likely than not, or maybe more likely than other things. It could come after Secret Wars. There's nothing to say it has to come before Secret Wars. I think other things like Doctor Strange 3 and whatnot, even this rumored Tommy Maximoff show would come sooner than later, which is what gives me pause. But Silver Surfer could come at any point. So I will give this a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's likely, but something is also telling me to bet against the coin flip. I think that we'll have to see the Fantastic Four, obviously, but I think that Silver Surfer could definitely be an important character as we move on into the MCU. So 6 out of 10. Next rumor is Captain America, Sam Wilson, and Captain Marvel will be basically leading the Avengers teams / maybe the movies themselves. I give this a 7, just straight up, because I think it's fair. I mean, these are two prominent characters that, will be given more, I think, responsibility and roles in the MCU moving forward. And in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Avengers Secret Wars, I think for sure they'll be at least leading the Avengers teams. I think that Tom Holland will probably be one of the lead characters in this, in these two films. But to have them, have Captain America and Captain Marvel co-leading or leading separate Avengers teams or whatever, I think is pretty plausible. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Now, let's have a couple rumors. Let's talk about a couple rumors about the MCU's X-Men. There's rumor that I read that Marvel wants Hugh Jackman as Wolverine for as long as possible. It didn't indicate, this report, whether or not this was going to be, through the end of Secret Wars or legitimately as long as he wants to. He will be the MCU's Wolverine until further notice. And it's because of that I give this a 2 out of 10. Not impossible. And I think there is a 9 out of 10 chance he shows up in Secret Wars again, or Doomsday or whatever. But to say that he's going to be continuing as Wolverine for as long as he wants to, no chance. I think, it's not impossible, but man, I just have a hard time seeing that. So I'm going to give that a 2 out of 10. Now, another rumor is that Kelsey Grammer is going to be the MCU's Beast, even after Secret Wars. And this one might surprise you. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think that there's nothing to say that Kelsey Grammer, they can, whatever they do with their soft reboot of the MCU after Secret Wars, they can be like, well, some of them can still carry over. There's a reason that different characters look like one another and whatnot in different universes. So yeah, totally fine. And I think Kelsey Grammer doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't really have to do motion capture either, unless they want him to. I think Beast at the end of the Marvels was all CGI. So totally fine if they wanted to go that route, or they can do motion capture with someone else or whatever. It doesn't matter. Right? Kelsey Grammer can just do the voiceover work. And he's a great voice of Beast. And I think that's, just to see him in the Marvels makes me think, yeah, that's totally plausible, if not possible. So I think he'd be a great Beast, and I give it an 8 out of 10, that he is the Beast of the MCU's X-Men moving forward. Now, to wrap this up, let's talk about 4 separate rumors about Spider-Man 4. There's so many things that have been rumored about Spider-Man 4. So let's start out with this first one here. Venom and other symbiotes, I almost said symbiotes, and Null from Venom, I'm misspeaking all over the place here. Venom and symbiotes, and also Null from Venom The Last Dance will be showing up in Spider-Man 4. And it doesn't specify whether Venom himself, Tom Hardy's Venom, will be showing up, or just a version of Venom, or the black suit will be showing up here. And here's the thing, and actually I might just separate these into 2 different rumors here. So let's talk about Venom and the black suit and the symbiotes first. I think that has a 7 out of 10 chance. I think that it makes sense, especially at the end of No Way Home, based on what happened there in the post-credit scene, to have Peter, the next part of his evolution is to go darker, right? He's maybe, in New York on his own by himself. There could be a corrupting influence there. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to get some version of the black suit in Spider-Man 4. Null appearing, I give that a 3. It's not impossible, but for what reason would Marvel have, to start crossing over Sony things into their universe, other than Tom Hardy's Venom for a post-credit scene, right? It makes all the sense in the world for Sony to push for that, but I don't know. I just can't imagine Kevin Feige going like, yeah, for sure, you could bring over all your characters, bring over Morbius and Madam Web. Obviously not, but, Null, bring him over. I don't know. Maybe Marvel always intended to use Null. Kevin Feige always wanted Null for Spider-Man 4. And, Sony was like, well, we also want to use him for Venom The Last Dance, and it's whatever. I don't really buy it. We'll see. Venom The Last Dance is coming in a couple weeks, and maybe the end of that movie will hint towards what's happening in Spider-Man 4. We'll see, but I don't know. I don't know if I buy it. The third rumor for Spider-Man 4 is that it's going to be called King in Black. And this is probably predicated on if these symbiotes actually show up and if Venom and a black suit actually shows up. But if that's the case, 8 out of 10. I think that's also a pretty good title, honestly, for that film. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's actually going to be called King in Black. I think it's a fine, if not a good title. It also seems to hint towards Kingpin, maybe. But, I think it shows maybe the arrogance also of Spider-Man in the black suit. And I buy that. So there is that. The fourth rumor is that Tobey and Andrew will be showing up again. And it depends. If this film is multiverse, then I think it's something like an 8 out of 10. If it's not, though, like 2 or 3 out of 10. Because of that, I'm going to hedge my bets here and go 5. I don't know what direction this film is taking. There are a lot of rumors, but they're just rumors that this film is going to be taking more of a multiversal turn. But I don't know. I mean, I thought everyone was on board with the idea of street level, but maybe Sony and Kevin Feige have different ideas. So I'm going to totally hedge my bets here and say 5 out of 10. And finally, the last rumor here, and this is the most interesting one to me. This is why I saved it for last. Doctor Doom is going to appear in Spider-Man 4. Now, on the surface, it's like, why? For what reason? But then you think about the connection that Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr., Spider-Man and Iron Man had. And you think about maybe the fact that Tom Holland is going to be a big, huge presence in Avengers Doomsday. And honestly, it makes a lot more sense than I originally thought. And you might be shocked. I'm going to give this an 8. I think it doesn't have to be in the movie. It could be a post-credit scene or whatever. But I think the chances of Doctor Doom showing up to set up what's going to happen in Doomsday, maybe he imprisons Peter at the end of Spider-Man 4. I don't know. Maybe Spider-Man 4, it's very possible that Spider-Man 4 takes place in Battleworld anyway. So yeah, I give it an 8 out of 10. Doctor Doom is going to show up in Spider-Man 4. So guys, let me know about, your thoughts about any of these rumors in the comments down below. This was a fun little exercise for me just to talk about things that I don't usually talk about. I don't really try to talk about rumors that much, but I think this was a fun little thing to do. Let me know if you'd like me to do this more in the future and what you think about any of these in the comments down below. And guys, that will do it for episode 44 of Access Blockbusters Pod. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like and comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, rate it on Spotify. And guys, thank you so much as always for listening. We are heading towards Venom: The Last Stand, so that'll be fun to talk about in just a couple of weeks here. And without anything else to talk about, I have all sorts of different topics planned as well. So hopefully you guys are still enjoying the podcast as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.